This lesson is going to be on user and group management. In this video, you're going to learn how to actually manage different user accounts and group memberships, as well as creating different groups. First, let's talk about creating users. There's two utilities you should be familiar with when creating users: the user add and the user mod. Let's go ahead and start with user add. With user add, you'll actually be able to add users and modify the user's group memberships. First, let's just go ahead by adding a user. User add, and we'll just create a user called user1. Now the user account has been created, and the home directory has been generated automatically for us within the home folder. You'll see user1, which is the user1's home directory. Now by default, when adding a user, it automatically adds it to the cat etc password file. You'll see that the user1 account was added here, as well as a few other parameters. The first parameter being the username, which is delimited by a colon, the shadow file reference, the user ID, the group ID, the user's home directory, and the user's default shell. Now we have this empty space here, which is used for a common name or description. I'll show you how to do that now. And this X, which references the shadow file is what stores the user's password. So let's go ahead and create another user, user2, that we will define a common name for. So we'll do user add -c, and we're just going to say this user's name is user2, and we'll follow that by the username again. So once we press enter, you'll see that the user account was created. We can echo the exit status. You'll see it's 0, which means everything worked out okay. So let's go ahead and cat the etc password file, and you'll see that we now have a user2 with the user ID 501, group ID 502. We now have the common name user2, as well as the default home directory for this user, which is auto-generated, and the default shell. Now we can also tell the user we want them to use a different shell, as well as being assigned to a different group, and so on. Let's go ahead and just do man user add, and we'll scroll through some of these different flags that we can use. For instance, we already used the -c, which here describes it as a comment, short description of the login. Now usually in the field you'll find that people use that for storing the actual user's name. Now we have -b, which is the base directory for the user. Now we also have -d, which is the user's home directory. So we can define different home directories. We can define when the user account will be disabled, so it will expire. We can also define when the user's password will be inactive. We can define the user's primary group, denoted by the lowercase g. And we can also supply the user with a list of secondary groups or supplementary groups, which is used with the -g. And you could just finish reading through these and it'll explain to you the different flags that you can use. So let's go ahead and exit this man page. And let's talk a little bit about the shadow file, which stores the passwords. So right now we haven't defined any passwords for the user accounts, which means those user accounts are actually inactive until the root user assigns the default password. So let's go ahead and cat the etc shadow file, and you'll see that we have the two records for user1 and user2, where user1 is the username. We have the double exclamation points where is the placeholder for the actual password. So once we set the password, the encrypted password will actually go here. This third column is where we have the days of what since the actual date of the Unix epoch. So this account was created 15,159 days after the Unix epoch. We have the next field being 0, which is usually default when creating accounts, but that is where the days before where the password can be changed. So you can actually use 1 day before the password can be changed. Then we have 99,999 in the next column, which pretty much means that this account could last forever. The password will never have to be changed. So usually you'll see that set to like 30 days or 90 days in an enterprise environment. The next field is actually a reminder the days before the password will expire. The user is warned. So this one has 7 days before the user is warned that the password will expire. The next field, which is empty, is will actually show you the days that the user has after the passwords have expired before the account will actually be disabled. So if the user hasn't changed the password yet, he'll have, let's say, 5 days, if you had a 5 here, to still use the account until the account will be disabled. The next field is blank now, but would be the number of days since the Unix epoch that the account was disabled. And the last field is not used at the moment. We have 0, meaning that the password can be changed at any time. We have an unlimited amount of days, so they'll never have to change the password. And we have 7 days prior to this amount of days. The user will be warned that they have to change their password. And right now, if you were to ever see the double exclamation point, you'll know that this account is disabled, since there has not been a password defined. So now let's talk a little bit about creating groups. So to create a group, we need to know about 2 other functions. We have group add and group mod. So let's just do man on group add. And you'll see this utility creates a new group. You also are given various flags that you could use, such as -f, -r. You can assign your own GID. If you don't assign it, the system will automatically generate it for you, and so on. So let's go ahead and create a group. We're going to do group add, and we'll create a group called students. So now we have the group students. We can see that if we go to the cat etc groups, and you'll see a new group was added with the group ID of 503 and the group name as students. So now let's go ahead, now that we have this group, we're going to want to give this group a home directory, let's say. A special folder for users that we create to use that go under students that will use this folder. So we're going to go ahead and go to cd home. Right now we have user 1, user 2. Let's go ahead and make directory students. You see now we have a directory called students. And let's go ahead and user add. We'll do -c, common name, user 3, -d will allow us to define the path to the home directory. So we'll do home students and we'll call this one user 3. And let's just do the number so we'll keep it uniform. And let's do -m to make that directory, and we'll do user 3. So now if you do home students user 3, you'll see that we have the folder created. And let's go ahead and cat the etc password file. you'll see that we have user 3 with a new defined home directory. One thing we forgot to do was assign the group for that user during user add. So let's go ahead and modify the user. We can do man user mod. So user mod will allow us to modify a user account. So let's say we wanted to actually change the home directory. We could do so here also, -d, just like the user add utility. We have -g, which would allow us to change the primary users group. G would allow us to assign this user to multiple groups. So let's just go ahead and assign this user 3, as the primary group students. So we'll do user mod -g user 3. Let's do students, and we'll do user 3. So what we're doing here is we're assigning user 3 to the primary group of students. So let's go ahead and press enter. Notice that the user was assigned to group number 504. So now if we cat /etc password, you'll see that that user is now assigned to group 503 for the primary group. So now let's talk about updating the password for user accounts. The password's updated using the PASSWD. Now using PASSWD without any username supplied will allow you to change the password for the account that you're currently logged in as. So right now we're currently logged in as root, so just pressing enter would allow me to change the password for the user root. So let's just type password. You'll see that the PAM module installed will actually let us know that we're using a bad password, that it's a dictionary word. But since we're root, it'll allow us to proceed and set that password anyways. So let's say I wanted to give a password to user 1. So remember in the shadow file you saw the double exclamation points, which said that that user had no password. So let's go ahead and assign it a password. So that would be PASSWD followed by the username. And let's just give it the password as ABC testing. ABC testing. And you'll see that the password was assigned, updated successfully. So now if we cat the contents of /etc shadow, you'll see that the user 1 now has an encrypted password. So let's go ahead and log out of the current user root. And we're going to go ahead and log in as, we'll say user 1. So we'll give it the username, user 1, and the password ABC testing. And you'll see now we're logged in as the user 1 using the password we have just defined. So let's say we were to open up user 1's home directory, you'll see that we have our desktop and no other files. So let's go ahead and log out of user 1. And we're going to try to log into the other users that we have not defined the password for. So let's try user 2. Password we didn't define, so let's press enter. And you'll see that it will not allow us to log in. So let's go ahead and log back into root. Let's open up a terminal. I'll zoom in a little bit for you guys. So let's go ahead and view the contents of user 1's home directory now. You'll see that they now have a desktop folder, just like when we were logged into user 1's account. You saw that there was a desktop folder. If we were to view the contents of user 2, you'll see that it still has nothing since that user has still not logged in. Now, how do you define what gets put into these user home directory by default? By default, you'll see a folder called /etc skel. So let's go to /etc skel, and you'll see that we have different things that are generated based off of when you create the account. So we can actually create a new /etc skel file. So let's go ahead and do that. so we can define defaults that the account should have when they first log in. So let's go ahead and cp-r Etsy Skell to Etsy Skell Custom. So now if you cd into Etsy Skell Custom, you'll see that we have all of the same files, and let's go ahead and make a new folder. Let's call it downloads, and let's create a file called test file. So you'll see now when we create a new user and define that user to have the default Skell as this one, they will actually have the default elements within the skeleton folder. So let's go ahead and create a new user, user add. We'll give it a common name, user4. We'll give it a custom skeleton file, Etsy Skell Custom. The home directory will be home students user4. Let's do -m, and let's do the primary group as students. And this is for user4. We can't forget the username. So let's press enter. And you'll see now if we do cat on the contents of Etsy password, you'll see that this user4 is assigned to the user group, the primary user group of students, has the common name of user4. We have the custom home directory and the default shell. So let's go ahead and look at the contents within this user's home directory by doing ls home students user4. And you'll see that they have a folder called downloads and a file called testfile.txt. So if we wanted to update the password, let's just do passwd user4, and we'll just set it to test, and let's try to log in as that user. Log out root. So we're gonna put user4, password was test, and you see we'll log in, and in the user's home directory we should have a downloads folder and a testfile.txt. The desktop folder is automatically created when you log into GNOME. So let's go ahead and just stay in this user's directory, and we'll open up a terminal. I'm going to go ahead and drag this up to this bar so it's easier for me to use. We're going to zoom in. Now remember how we said the Etsy password file was actually world readable? That means any user can read it. Let's go ahead and just do Etsy password file, and you'll see we can actually read that file. So storing the password here, how that was done before, was actually a big security problem. So let's try to read the shadow file now. You'll see that we do not have privileges to actually read that file. Only root and certain processes on the system can actually read that file. So let's say we want to change the password on user 2, because user 2 has no password. You'll see that we will not be able to actually set user 2's password from this account, since we need to be root. So in order to change passwords, we would need to be logged in as root to change all the passwords except for our own. So let's go ahead and log into root from this terminal. In order to do that, we would use the utility called su, su, super user. So super user followed by the dash symbol will allow us to actually log in as root. Now you could just log in as root using su without the dash, but that would not give you all of the environmental variables that you needed. So let's do su followed by a space and a dash, which will also transfer us to the root's home directory. We're going to put the root's username, the root's password, sorry, and you'll see that we're now logged in as root. So let's say Let's go ahead and view the contents of the Etsy password file. So we give a password to user 1, and we've given one to user 4, where we could see at shadow. So let's go ahead and give a password to user 2. Now if you remember, we use the password utility followed by the username. You would just give it a password, test. But let's say I didn't want to do those 2 steps and I just wanted to do it in one line. I could also just do echo test. And I'm going to go ahead and redirect that into, or pipe that into PASSWD standard in --std in followed by the username. So let's do user 3. And you'll see that it actually updated the password for us on one line, which is primarily useful for scripts. So now we can add users, modify users, and add groups. We can actually see a list of all the groups instead of going to the Etsy group file by just typing in groups. And this would give you and if we would just do man on groups, and you'll see it prints out the list of groups that this currently logged in user is in. We can actually see more information about a particular user by just doing ID user 4, for instance. You'll see that the user ID is 503 for user 4. The username is user 4. The primary group ID is 503 students. And this would be where the list of groups would be, comma delimited. But since right now we only have one group for this user, it is only showing us the one. So why don't we just go ahead and add a new group. So we'll do group add, and we'll call this one faculty. And let's go ahead and give user 4 a supplementary group of faculty. So we'll do user mod -g faculty, and we'll follow that by user 4. So now if we did an ID on user 4, you'll see that it's now a part of the students group and the faculty group, where the primary group is still students. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and talk about how we can remove users. So first let's just do a ls on the home directory, and you'll see we have user 1 and user 2. Let's go ahead and remove user 2. So we're going to do user del, del for delete, followed by user 2. Now if we do this, it will actually remove the user, but if we were to check the home directory, we'll see that the user's home directory is still there. But let's say we wanted to remove the user as well as the home directory. We could do user del, followed by -r, which would actually allow us to remove the home directory, user 1. So now if we did ls on the home, you'll see that user 1's home directory is no longer there. Let's go ahead and remove the rm to user 2, and now we'll only have the group. Now we only have users with the folder group students. So let's go ahead and cat the Etsy PASSWD file, and you'll see we only have user 3 and user 4, which are both primary user groups of 503, which is students. Let's say we wanted to remove a group as well. If we wanted to remove a group, we would have to do group del, followed by the group name. So let's just go ahead and cat the contents of Etsy group, and you'll see that we have user 3 as well as faculty and students. So let's go ahead and just remove the user 3 group. We're going to go ahead and do group del user 3. Now if we were to view the contents of the group file, you'll see that the user 3 group is no longer there. Let's go ahead and do one more thing with users, which is to modify the actual shell that the user is using. So far we've been using bash, which we could find the path to bash by just doing which on bash. Now we can also try on sh, bin sh. So let's say we wanted to give a user the default shell for bin sh instead of bash. Let's just go ahead and do user add, or let's do man user add, and you'll see that it'll actually allow us to modify this using the -s flag. The name of the user's login shell. Default is to leave it blank, which causes the system to select the default login shell. So let's just go ahead and press Q, and let's go user add, and we'll do user 1 since we can now, since the user no longer exists, and we'll give it a default shell of bin sh. Now if we were to cat the contents of the etc password file, you'll see that the default shell is now set to bin sh. So if we were to sudo to user 1, you'll see now that we're now logged into the bin sh shell. Let's do exit to log out. We're back at root, and let's go ahead and talk about another file, the login defs file. So the login defs actually defines the defaults. So let's go ahead and view the contents, or let's do less on the contents. And you'll see this defines the default mail directory, the defaults for the password expirations, where the UIDs start, and what the maximums are. So for anything over 500, for any user ID that has over 500, you know that it's an actual user. Anything under 500 would be a system process or root users. We have the maximums and minimums for group IDs. So the group IDs also start at 500 and end at 60,000. By default, we're creating the home directory, and the umask by default is 077, which means the default is 700. Right here you'll see that if we were to try to delete a user group, or if we were trying to delete a user and that group no longer had any users, it would actually remove the group for us. And by default you'll see that the passwords are encrypted by MD5. We can actually disable the encryption by just putting no here instead.